Delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today for the Black History Moment, I will highlight a few central figures whose stories may be lesser known, but more importantly, I want to discuss why that may be. Unfortunately, the stories of Black women continue to be silenced, and I felt like this was a good time to bring their voices to our hearing in this body. For example, Mr. Speaker, we often hear about suffragettes and leading women in the fight for equality, but we need to learn the whole story. Did you know that Black women were caught in the middle of exclusion from white suffragist organizations and the tactics of white supremacy that others employed? When talking about the ability of Black males to vote, Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "It becomes a serious question whether we had better stand aside and let Sambo walk into the kingdom first." On the same topic, Susan B. Anthony said, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will ever work for or demand the ballot for the Negro and not the woman." Let that sink in, because she didn't even allow for the existence of the Negro woman in her contrived dichotomy. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if anyone has told you about Charlotte 14 and her daughters Harriet, Sarah, and Margaretta, who co-founded the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. They held leadership positions and made sure their more progressive perspective was heard in consideration for planning and execution of their activities. They also raised the important connection with literacy and freedom and the abolitionist and suffragist movements. Did you also know, Mr. Speaker, that when you met members of Black sororities here on Capitol Square, you met women who stand on the shoulders of those who marched alongside the headline grabbers in the suffragist movements? Please understand the whole story, because the legacy of Black women fighting for our own liberation dates back to the creation of our oppression. Another period of history we reflect upon often is the Civil Rights Movement. Here's another example of erasure of Black women's voices. The Big Six, Mr. Speaker, was a term used to describe 6 prominent Black leaders of that time. And while Randolph, King, Farmer, Lewis, Young, and Wilkins were amazing in their own right, if you don't know the names Dorothy Height, Gwendolyn Simmons, Septima Clark, Mildred Roxborough, Doris Derby, and Ruby Sales, you haven't learned the whole story. Mr. Speaker, my mother often told me that if I didn't tell the whole story, it wasn't true. I offer today that that's where we can focus our efforts. I ask you to examine your own lives, both past and present. In what ways are you silencing the voices of Black women? Are there times when you let mediocrity outshine excellence? In what ways do you proliferate your undeserved privilege versus understanding that the space should be shared? In what ways does your movement seek to speak for others versus amplifying the voices that can speak for themselves? And also, let's examine our systems. What does it mean when our textbooks only highlight certain figures and not others? What message does it send that you might only discuss the major and crucial contributions and achievements of Black people during the month of February? What does it mean to have doctors, lawyers, politicians, and all kinds of decision makers who don't know the whole story of our history, Mr. Speaker? What does it mean to continually talk of the Commonwealth's 400 years and gloss over the painful parts? In what ways can we honor the fact that words matter and actually say enslaved humans were brought here, not that they just arrived? How can we intentionally and continuously shine a light on the ways in which Black women's voices are silenced by telling half-truths about our collective history? Today, starting now, Mr. Speaker, I urge us that we need to make sure together that we tell the whole story, or else it's just a lie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.